Recently, I saw a video from Chess Page 1 titled The Only Opening You Need as Black, teaching how to play the King's Indian Defense in a very simple and interesting way. So I decided to take some inspiration and do a similar thing, but this time for white, teaching you guys the only opening you need as white and maybe as black too. And I'm talking about the Bird's Opening. Bird's Opening is a very easy, simple setup that you can play as white against pretty much anything that black throws at you, except for the From's Gambit. We're going to take a look at that too. And you can also use the same theory to play as black, which is similar to the Dutch defense, which is kind of a colors reversed Bird's Opening. And you can play using a similar theory, and it's going to be similar to the classical Dutch variation. And I'm going to teach you guys how to play this opening, and it all starts with the move f4. So I'm going to break this down into 3 steps, 3 phases of the opening. First, we're going to develop and castle. So we're going to protect our king, put the king into safety is the first thing and first priority. And after that, we're going to try to fianchetto the bishop on b2, if possible. If that's not possible, then we jump to step 3, which is developing an attack. Our final pieces, our last minor pieces, and then performing an attack. And I'm going to show you more or less how these 3 stages, these 3 phases work on the board. So here I am on a setup position in chess.com analysis board, and I'm going to move the pieces as we should do in a typical game. So the first move is going to be f4. So we're going to move this pawn up. No matter what black does here, more often than not, they're going to play this move, except by this move, which is the From's Gambit. You know, if your opponent plays e5, then you have to think of a different plan. But besides that, no matter what black plays here, if they play this, or even this, or any other move, you can keep playing the same setup. Second move is going to be knight out, and then you're going to play this pawn to e3, opening up your bishop. If your opponent plays this castle here, this knight here, you can try to go ahead and pin it to the king, okay? So your bishop is going to come here or here if the knight is here. If not, you can just leave the bishop here and it's not a big deal. And your next move is going to be castle. So let's try to remember this. f4, knight goes to f3, and then you push e3, develop the bishop, and castle. So you have your first moves here on the board, and your king is safe and castled in position. If your opponent goes for the fianchetto on this side of the board, you are not going to be able to fianchetto here for the most part. Okay, so if your opponent goes for the fianchetto, you are not going to do this. But if your opponent doesn't go for the fianchetto on this side, on the king side of the board, you can try to go and do it yourself. So this is part number 2, the second phase of this opening. Try to fianchetto your bishop on b2 if possible. And this bishop is going to be very, very strong and help you in this attack on the king side. And if that's not possible, you just ignore this part and go straight to the next one. The next part is going to be play d3 and try to move your pieces around, try to develop an attack. So playing d3 is going to be our next move. And then we're going to try to put this knight here. We're going to jump with this knight over here. If the bishop is here, if this bishop is outside of the pawn chain, we might try to trade this bishop for this knight. And another typical move is this queen maneuver here to e1 and then to h4. So we can try to go and try some attack on the king side, some quick checkmate, maybe some knight here and checkmate on h7. It's a possibility. So this is the basic setup. We might try to go knight here. This knight will jump here. We might try to do this. And then maybe some rook lift here. All these moves are possible, but there are plans that we can do. Sometimes we can even push for e4. It's also possible. Now let's take a look on how a typical Birds game could go. We're going to start by playing f4. This is our first move. Opponent is probably going to reply by playing this move right here, d5. This is the most common move, the most common reply by black here. But they can also play something else. They can go for maybe c5. They can go for a symmetrical opening, which is going to be Birds versus Dutch defense. They can also go for the From's Gambit. In that case, we're going to take a look a little later. But this is the most common move. So after that, we're going to keep up with our plan. We're going to develop our pieces and try to castle. This is phase number 1, right? So opponents might play this move too. We are going to push our pawn to e3, then develop the bishop and castle. This is the first part. If the opponent plays the knight here, we can go ahead and try to pin this knight, okay? And more often than not, we're going to trade the bishop for the knight. So if opponent plays this move, we can go ahead and trade, try to double up our opponent's pawns here on the queen side. But if the opponent plays something else, if they go for, let's say, this knight here, then we can simply play this move, and then we can castle next move, okay? Or if you want to wait to see where your opponent's going to play this knight, so you can pin it, you can go ahead and play this move and try to fianchetto the bishop, and then when the opponent plays the knight here, you can go ahead and develop this bishop, pinning the knight, and then you can castle. So feel free to change the move order a little bit after you get used with the opening. So if your opponent delays this move, and you already played this bishop, don't move it again. You don't have to, you don't need to. You can go ahead and keep up with your plan. And castle. Okay, this is phase number 1. Our king is brought into safety. We are castled. We develop these pieces. This pawn is controlling the center. We might try to jump with the knight here to e5 in the future. So opponent might go and play this move. Sometimes they try to go here and try to pin the knight. Don't worry. This bishop is protecting the knight, so it's not a problem if they go for this move. Not a big deal. If they just push here on e6, we're going to keep up with our plan. Since our opponent did not fianchetto the bishop here, we're going to do it ourselves, so it's not going to be contested by their bishop, right? So they're probably going to try and develop their bishop here, or maybe go for some other development move. Let's say they play the bishop out. We are going to develop our bishop. They're probably going to castle. And now we play d3, which is the beginning of the third phase of our opening. We're playing this move, so we prevent any advancement from the pawns here in the center. And we can already go for some tactics here, some attacks. You know, we can bring this knight here. We can bring this knight to the action too. And this rook, the queen can come here. The rook can be lifted here. We have many options here to play as white. Okay, so it depends on what black does here. We're going to change our plans a little bit, but usually we're going to play this knight here. We might even try to push this pawn in the future. So the knight comes here, the queen slides here to try an attack. We can come with a knight over here or here. We can come here and try to trade the knight, or if they develop this bishop here, trade the knight for the bishop. All these things are possible here. Okay, so we have plenty of options as white. But how about the Fromm's Gambit? If your opponent plays this move, which is e5, we consider this the Fromm's Gambit. So they're trying to take your pawn here. And if you actually accept this gambit, they might try to go for the queen and some jacks here on this open diagonal. So we have to recognize that this move f4 actually weakens this diagonal. And we have to be aware of the weaknesses. Every opening has strengths and weaknesses. And this move f4 creates, of course, a weakness, but everything has strengths and weaknesses. So what you can do against this is playing e4 here and try to go for a king's gambit. This is exactly the king's gambit. It's a transposition. If you know how to play the king's gambit, if it's an opening you like, you can go for this, certainly. If you don't like playing the king's gambit, like me, for example, what I recommend here to keep it simple is to just take once, because more often than not, black is going to offer a second pawn here. But I don't usually take this pawn because it runs into this move, and it's quite difficult to defend here. If you don't know exactly what you're doing, you might get checkmated in a couple moves. So what I recommended doing here is just developing the knight. It feels like you are protecting this pawn, but you're actually not. You are giving this pawn back. You're giving some material back. So you weaken black's attack here. You're probably going to take, you push your pawn, and from here you can develop freely. This move is not available anymore because the knight is, protecting this square. So there's no way the black's queen is going to infiltrate here. You can keep up by playing this move, trying to develop the bishop, go here, castle. It's a very simple game for white in this position too. Now, flipping the board, if you are playing black, you can use the same theory to play the Dutch defense, the classical variation of the Dutch defense, And this is one of the favorite openings from GM Simon Williams, which is the Ginger GM, and he teaches this opening in his channel too. Has many courses and DVDs on this opening, and you can play it against pretty much anything that white plays, except for e4. Against e4, you should have a different weapon, but against, for example, d4, against the English opening, the bird's defense itself, bird's opening itself, you can play this Dutch defense, it's possible. Any other opening that white goes for, you can try and go for the Dutch. So let's imagine they play d4. You can go ahead and play the same setup. It's the same system. You're just playing it as black, you know, and it's known as the Dutch defense, the classical variation. You're going to do pretty much the same things. Let's imagine they go for this move, c4. You're going to develop your knight. If they develop their knight here, you're going to play this pawn right here. If they go here, you can go ahead and play this move. Remember, pinning the knight. If you don't want to do that, you can just play here on e7, and it's pretty much the same thing. It's good. It's not a problem. If they try to kick your bishop, you can trade it. You know, you're doubling white's pawns here. It's not a big deal. If they go for this move, don't worry. It's not a big deal too. You still have the queen backing up the knight here, so it's not a big deal as well. If they just close here, you can go ahead and castle. They might try to develop here or here, whatever. You might try to go for the fianchetto like I told before. We can go here and fianchetto the bishop is very powerful in this diagonal. If they try to go for any other opening moves, let's say they do this, you just take, double their pawns. You can go ahead and start our phase 3 of the opening, play this move. We can go and develop this knight, jump with this knight over here. We can slide the queen over there. You can see that the Dutch defense theory is very, very similar with the bird's opening. So you're basically playing bird's opening as black. You are a tempo down. And when you're playing the bird's opening, you're basically playing Dutch defense colors reversed with a tempo up, which is pretty good, right? Well, and that's pretty much it, guys, for this opening. It's not very difficult to play. The setup is very simple. Remember, you go for f4, develop your knight, play e3, develop your bishop, castle, and then from here, you can try and go the fianchetto, you can play d3, try to develop the knight, the queen, and it's an easy game for you. And if this video helped you and gave you some weapon to play as white and black, it's just one opening against everything, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I would love to have some comments. If you'd like to leave a comment below too, yeah, I would really appreciate it. And I see you guys in the next video.